Very much. Welcome everyone to this module 4, which is the final module in this training series. I've just left my camera on just to say hello, but what I'm going to do is switch my video off because it makes the PowerPoint much easier, and it may make the audio better for some of you. So really I've just left the camera on just to say hello, so I'm just going to switch that off now. Today we're being joined by Elaine Davis as well, who's in support. So she'll be answering questions in the chat group and also the Q&A. So if you've got any questions about today, then please just pop them into the Q&A, and Elaine will sort those out for you. And if it's something, she might even kind of alert me, and I'll probably say it over the microphone as well. I hope you can all hear me clearly. We've got quite a lengthy PowerPoint to show you, a lot of work to look at. So we'll make a start. But the objective today is to jointly explore the common standards for the A-level art design qualification. And this being module 4, if hopefully you've had a chance to look at module 1 and 2 online, which are subject specific. And then the module 3 is more of a generic module, which is just looking at support from Pearson. So if you haven't had a chance to do module 1 and 2, there's always an opportunity after this event, obviously, to go back and look at those. But if you have done that, you should be well prepared. What I would suggest that would be useful for you later on would be to have a copy of the performance calculator. And really, as well, another thing that would be very useful would be to have access to the exemplar gallery, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So we'll just look at the aims and objectives of today's event. It's just the title slide. Oops, something's happened there. Okay, sorry about that. If I move my mouse too much, strange things happen, so I'm sorry about that. So the session aims and objectives, as it says on the slide, it's to gain confidence in identifying the characteristics of the A-level assessment criteria. It's really to help you for marking GCSE coursework and the ESA sustained focus. And we're going to do that through a range of exemplars and from different levels and different titles. Obviously, we can't use every title and we can't use every level in the time that we're given, but we'll do our best. And we've got quite a nice broad range of titles and marks to show you. So today's agenda, we're going to start off by just having a quick reminder, refresher of the specification. We'll then look at the marking criteria, a little bit about internal standardization, and we're doing that through the exemplars that we have here and through the exemplars that we're going to kind of highlight in the exemplar gallery. So we're really looking for the common standard, and then there's an opportunity at the end to ask more questions and really find out as much as you can. So you can see from, I won't read everything out on the slide, but you can see roughly from today's agenda. It's a lot to get through, and we'll try and get through the best we can. So when I press my button to go to the next slide, it doesn't, so I'll use my mouse. So so the specification from 2015, it's nearly 10 years now since we introduced this specification, and we're just going to remind you of the structure of the A-level qualification. So we have 6 titles available to you, and the reason we have those, the purpose of the different titles in this qualification is to enable candidates to select the most appropriate that fits their working practice, but also to study multiple disciplines. So there is the possibility there that if you would like, students would like to do more than one A-level in art and design, they can do a fine art photography or fine art textiles, or perhaps even more than 2. That's very brave if they do, but the possibility is there. Each of which has its own caching code, and therefore it entitles them to claim that as and also the school to claim that as in the performance tables. Of course, each one of those titles carries with it the normal UCAS points for an A-level, and so it really is designed for those students perhaps who want to do more than one title, who wish to carry on with a career in the creative industry. So I would suggest that, perhaps if it's just an additional A-level, maybe that's not appropriate at all. But anyway, the reason we have the different titles is primarily for that. But what you need to understand is that there are crossovers. The important thing to note is that if a student has been entered for fine art for component 1, then you'd expect them to be, well, they have to be entered for fine art for component 2. However, the look of the work may be different. It may well be that in component 1, a fine art student is doing lots of textile work or photography, including that. It doesn't forbid them from actually exploring areas in other titles. It just means that you simply have to enter them for the same component. What happens in a lot of centres is that they choose perhaps art, craft and design, and all candidates are entered for art, craft and design, or all entered for fine art. And that's a blanket way of doing it. And then in other centres where perhaps it's more bespoke, where you perhaps have only perhaps smaller classes. I mean, in big centres, you may have a specialist teacher delivering textiles, and therefore that group is entered as textiles, and you have another one delivering graphic communication, and then that one's entered as graphic communication. However, in a small school where perhaps you've got 10 students, it may be possible, if you wanted to do that, to teach the whole cohort in the same lessons, but you might enter 1 or 2 for fine art, 1 for textiles, 2 for graphics, you know, where it fits and how it best fits that student's work in practice. So that's the reason for the titles, really, is to give some different opportunities and to make it fair across all of the students. So again, I'll try to use my button to move forward. I'll use my mouse. It's the A-level art and design structure has been very much the same throughout. There's been very few changes. The difference between ourselves and perhaps other examining bodies is that we have a separate mark for the personal study. So component 1, the personal investigation, the practical work is the same mark as for component 2. So there's 72 marks for part 1, which is the personal investigation, and it's from personal starting points that are agreed with you and the students. Quite often, centres are using past ESA assignments that we've given to you in the previously, things like simple and complex or seek, obscure, whatever, which would now from last year would now become perhaps a starting point for students beginning their A-level studies this year. So you can use past ESA titles to do that. But the essence of it is that we're looking for a body of work supporting studies with personal outcomes from starting points that you've given or been agreed with the student. The student come up with their own, but obviously that again would be negotiation with you. The second part of that is the personal study, which is a continuous piece of prose from 1,000 to 3,000 words. Of course, if it's 850 words or it's 3,500 words, it's not as critical. What's important is that there's a bibliography and there's acknowledgement of where those sources have been taken from. We'll talk a little bit more about the personal studies we go through. Unfortunately, in these online sessions and in the face-to-face sessions, it's very difficult to really do justice to the personal study because you obviously need to read some of them, and that takes time. So really, what we've done is we've included all the personal studies for the component ones, and as you go through this presentation today, you'll see that there's opportunities there to look at those, but of course it's probably something you're going to do outside of after the presentation is finished. For component 2, the externally set assignment, it's a broad-based theme released to teachers and available to students on the 1st of January. Oh, sorry, 1st of February. It'd be nice if it was January. No, it's February. The sustained focus period of 15 hours, controlled assessment, in which students create final responses to the theme. And really what it's about is about students preparing, once that paper is released, is preparing a body of work, preparatory studies, and coming up with a personal outcome. Oh, that's great. Somebody just said we had 3 personal studies essays to read prior to. That's brilliant. That's fantastic. So what you can do is then you probably have a go at putting a mark on them, which is even better. But what we're looking for today as we go through this event is perhaps to familiarise you with the standard, and then hopefully that you have a go at marking some on with everybody here. It's not quite the same as a face-to-face event where you can network, but you can still within the chat group that you can share ideas quite nicely. So we'll just move on to the next slide. So a key issue for us and also for you is the importance of internal standardization. This is critical to safeguarding fairness within the group being assessed, and it's incumbent on you and the centre to ensure that this is taking place before moderation. And the reason for that is that if we come into your centre to moderate and we ask the question, have you internally standardised, and you say no, it's so important to us that we would withdraw from the centre and give you an opportunity to do that before we came back to do the moderation. So it's to ensure that the work of all candidates within a centre has been marked to the same standard. So this is critical, of course, where obviously if you've got one teaching group and one teacher, it's not a problem at all. But if you've got two teaching groups and one teacher, they need to be standardized across the groups. If you've got more than one teacher and more than one group, then of course all of those teachers need to get together and agree the marks and the rank order before those marks are submitted. It's critical because we're only sampling. When we moderate in your centre, we are only taking a sample. So your centre might have 12 students and we may see all of them. But equally, you might have 110 students and we're still only seeing 12 students. And if we have made an adjustment with one student, we're expecting all of the students on that mark to have been marked to the same standard. Therefore, if they've been overmarked by 5 or 10 marks and we adjust them back to the standard, then everybody that we haven't seen in the sample will also be moved. So you can see how critical it is that internal standardization has actually effectively been taking place in the centre. So we're going to move on again to the next slide. So we're going to look at the performance calculators and how to use them. Just the title slide. Now, I think prior to the pandemic, I think everyone who was delivering this qualification for us was using this performance calculator. It's an assessment tool that goes hand in hand with the assessment grids to help you find the mark for the student. So they were designed to enable you to accurately establish the achievement of your candidates, and they'll help you generate marks for each assessment objective before you fill in the assessment grid. They were introduced at the beginning of the specification. There's now a track record to show that centres who are using them correctly are achieving consistent accuracy in their marking. The assessment grids use generic terms to identify the characteristics of a candidate's performance, whereas the performance calculators are much more specific in their criteria and descriptions. And they were compiled using the experience of a large group of senior examiners who were asked to describe in their own words the expectations of the performance of candidates at different levels. And as you can see across the top, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, that each of those boxes has underneath it some words that kind of describe that what we think a limited candidate is, which is partial inconsistent. We'll look at that again in a few slides in more detail. And as you can see, that would apply across each of those 4 assessment objectives. Critical to us is the fact that we have 4 assessment objectives which are equally weighted. However, perhaps unlike GCSE, which is probably more skill-based, an A-level qualification really does depend on the kind of a more sustained journey, perhaps the more maturity in the ideas being developed through sustained and focused investigations. And they are informed by contextual and other sources, and they should demonstrate analytical and critical understanding. And what we find is that although it's only an equal weighting for AO1, it does really inform AO2, 3, and 4 in much the same way perhaps as the written element in the personal study helps inform the journey that the student takes later on. So how does that work in terms of the performance calculator? What we're suggesting is that at the beginning of a course, rather than using your own assessment criteria, your own assessment form of assessment or internal assessment, that you stick with the assessment tool that you're going to deliver with this specification. So there's no point coming up with your own version to kind of assess interim assessments. You might just as well use this performance calculator. And really don't just do it in isolation. Sit down with the students and mark through it. And what you'll come up with is something a little bit like this. So after the first body of work has been completed, I thought I got rid of all of those things at the back, but they seem to keep appearing. Once the students have created some supporting studies or a period of study in their sketchbooks, and they've come up with an outcome in perhaps the beginning of year 12 in that first project. Maybe you'd sit down with them and go through that and look through the work, look through what they've submitted, and look what their outcomes are. And perhaps you'd go through that and you'd see that perhaps in AO1 they're performing quite well in level 3. They're exploring materials quite effectively, so they're kind of working higher in level 4 for that. They're not doing so well with their recording, perhaps because they're exploring materials, but they're recording. They've not had sufficient opportunities to develop those skills, the use of the formal elements, and so perhaps they're still in basic in AO3, But the personal response is improving too, so they're in level 3. So this is an imaginary candidate, and you can see at the beginning of a course, they might be spread out across those levels, across each assessment objective. Well, once you've done that, it's very easy then to identify what you need to do to help them to improve their performance. And really, it's just like a simple graph allowing you to plot the candidate's position at the moment. It's completely wrong to simply define a candidate's performance by generally branding them with one level and then award an AO in each of that level. That's really a misuse of the performance calculator and will result in poor assessment decisions. So what you need to do is to try and see where that candidate is and where they're performing and where you can help them improve. Obviously, as you move through the course and they're getting through the end of year 12 into year 13, they've had sufficient experience and they've had sufficient support from you to enable them to move progressively up the performance calculator through the different levels, and it will generally even out, but that's not guaranteed that they're going to be working all in level 4 or all in level 5. It may well be they still have kind of some things to do to help them, perhaps in AO1 or in AO4, and that's just the way that's just the difference between each individual student. So the idea is that we get them up to speed throughout the course using the performance calculator. The empty boxes are there so that you can add in comments of your own, perhaps even use some of the words from the descriptors above. And that will help indicate where they're performing well and what really describes the work that they've submitted. But we don't use this assessment tool in isolation. It's used with the exemplar gallery, which we'll talk about shortly. And also important to remember that there is a personal study performance calculator for the written element, which is a separate one, which looks at, and then looking at some of the key words in there. So when they're doing the written content, is it informed, is it erudite, comprehensive exploration of contextual references, things like that, that will bring you up to that kind of exceptional level in level 6, if that's where they want to go. Just a brief word about the assessment grid. The assessment grid is the official document that comes with specification, and it was designed to accompany that, to record the marks, and that's really the purpose of it. Once you've marked the candidate's work, it gives you, yes, it gives you an outline, a limit of what limited, basic, emerging, competent, consistent, confident, and exceptional are, but really it doesn't go into any more detail than that. So it shows you whereabouts, what mark they achieved in each of those assessment objectives, and able to tally them up and add on to the personal study if it's a component 1. And it really is that's the document that you have to put out on your candidate's work when they're being moderated. However, if you are brave enough and you feel it would be far more useful to a moderator to see the performance calculator. Now, this is an assessment tool that accompanies the specification. It's not a requirement to put that out, but if you wanted to kind of help your moderator, then that would give them some idea of what marks you'd used and why you'd use them, especially not just a few arrows, but perhaps put a few comments in there to explain why you think that candidate is performing at that level and deserves that mark. One last thing about the performance calculators is that if you notice that the 72 mark seems a very strange mark to use, but it's simply that we have 6 levels and 4 assessment objectives. And if you look through that, each assessment objective at each level has 3 marks. So the idea was that if you're in limited, are you at the bottom of limited, or at the top of limited, or in the middle? So it's that simple choice of finding the level and then kind of refining that a little bit of whether you're at the top, middle, or bottom of each level. And that really was one of the reasons why we've ended up with 72 marks. The other thing that we did at the very beginning of this qualification, when it was launched in 2015, was that we took all our top candidates or top students from the exemplar materials that were marked out of 80 at that time with a legacy spec. And we took the very best students who are on full marks, and we didn't put them at top of level 6, we put them in level 5. So effectively what we meant, we recalibrated the qualification. So what you'll find is that, and standards don't change even over 10 years really, students do what students do. The subjects might change, other things might change, but generally the standard tends to be the same across quite a long period of time. And so what we've done by populating level 5 with our top students from the legacy qualification, we were able to say, or able to find that all the grades can be found from level 5 down to level 1. So you'll find A and A star in level 5. Okay, it's the top of level 5 for A star, but it is in level 5. And then as you go down, it's quite simple. You know, level 4 is a B, level C is a 3, roughly. Level 2 is a D, and top of level 1 is where the E is found. That's where the grades are found at the moment. They could change. If they were to change and to move, and there was to be some grade inflation, the wonderful thing about this performance calculator is that because it's not part of the original specification, it's easy to change the words. Whereas if it wasn't, it would be more difficult. So if all of a sudden we had grade inflation, we can move some of those words from one level to another if we had to. Thank goodness we haven't had to do that. There's been stability in this qualification for the last 10 years, and the grade boundaries have really stayed much the same. So again, going back, this assessment grid is really just to put your marks in, to record those and ready for the moderation. And when the moderator comes in, it's a process, the moderation process samples the centre's assessment decisions, including the highest and lowest candidate. We always have to see the highest and lowest across each component. And the purpose of the moderation is to ensure that common standards are being applied throughout the qualification to make it fair to every centre who takes part in this. So the marks are internally assessed and externally moderated. It's a sample across all submitted, across all titles, and we check the accuracy of the centre assessment. And at the end of that, we release a report on results day commenting on the accuracy of the centre's internal assessment. We're not commenting on the course or the structure of the course or particular candidates. We can't do that. So the feedback we give is fairly generic, but hopefully gives you some indication if perhaps your centre assessment wasn't where it should have been. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to make sure that it's fair to all students and everyone is marking to the same assessment criteria. So once we've done that, how do we know where the grades are? Well, it's no secret. How do students know the grades they're going to get from the marks from those assessment grids? So I'll put this slide up. This is not you get this pack, you'll have this slide. It's not a secret. It's on the website if you were to look. The notional grade boundaries for each title and component are available online. We've included them in this presentation because rightly or wrongly, we must acknowledge centres often reference them when they start marking. Therefore, we'd like to clarify how they should and shouldn't be considered in the process of assessment. These are the 2024 grade boundaries for A-level for art and design, and they can change. Grade boundaries can be used as a reference once a mark has been arrived at using the performance calculator and the exemplars, but they are notional grade boundaries, and they can change when it comes to awarding. So they are the grade boundaries for last year, not for the current year that you're going to be assessing in. And that's the key thing. Now, just from just a little bit an update on that. These marks, these grade boundaries, if you look at art, craft and design, fine art, graphics, they're all the same across each paper 1, paper 2. The paper 1T is just for a retake, but it's the same. They're the same marks. So for an A star in any of those titles is 72 out of 90 for the component 1 and 55 out of 72 for component 2. That's for the A star. And if you look down, you'll see across that sheet, you'll see all the others. Now, where it varies is in photography. And the reason for that is that photography has often been overmarked in the past and has had some effect. So if we were to come into your centre and look at the photography sample and look at the fine art sample, and they were sampled together, and we moved photography down, then it would have moved fine art down. So in order to stop that happening, we have since the beginning of this qualification sampled photography as a separate title. So photography is sampled separately, all the others are sampled together. So if we come into your centre, we will see a sample of photography and a sample of the others. The reason for that is, I think, possibly one of the reasons, and probably many reasons, is that often people taking an A-level in photography haven't necessarily done a GCSE in art and design. They don't necessarily have the same set of skills. They can come to us at A level, and obviously the idea of it's a different different expertise, a different discipline, and sometimes the centres have been a bit generous with their marking, and so and that comes out in terms of, and that's still happening a little bit, because if you look at photography, it's kind of 1 mark each on each of the grades for component 1, and for the component 2 it's actually 2 marks different from the others. So if you can see there between photography and 3D design and textiles that there's a slight difference in the grade boundaries. Now, you don't mark to grade boundaries, because that would be maybe a slightly bit misguided, if you like, because what would happen is that you're going to last year's grade boundaries and not the ones that are next year. All I can say about that is that the grade boundaries are useful to know, they're a useful thing to do, but they should really be something that comes after rather than before you start marking. So you would use the performance calculator, the descriptors, the exemplar gallery, and then perhaps just have a look at the grade boundary and say, well, that may be where that student is, and that's the way it goes. But you can't hang your hat on the grade boundaries, because they can change. They're the one thing that can change, as indeed tolerance can change when we're marking the work. So we don't really kind of go too near that, really. So looking at the assessment objectives, if we strip back the assessment objectives to their essential points, they demonstrate an holistic view in the creative process and should be engaged within an authentic and individual way. Students will be assessed on their ability to produce a sustained line of inquiry, and the focus is on the quality rather than quantity. It's essential to develop ideas and not simply skills, technique, or process. Critical analysis and meaningful annotation should be inherent within the submission, but the prime objective of any student is to use their chosen area of study to fully engage with developing their own ideas, supported by research, to create their own their own origin for a personal response. So I was just reading from my notes there, just to make sure that I got that right. Now we're going to look very briefly just at each level. As I said before, we had on the performance calculator, you can see all those levels going up to level 6, and we've got those words in there. Well, let's have a look a bit closely at those words along with the images that accompany them. So when we set out the descriptors for this level, we asked what kind of words really remind us what a limited candidate looks like, and we're trying to be positive, but of course it is limited. So we've got words like partial, inconsistent, literal, elementary, minimal. It's pedestrian, it's credible, but it lacks control over the form elements. Now, this is just because the student at the start of a course usually has perhaps not got the level of skills or maturity that they would like, and it is a process of improving that. But these are the characteristics that we see, and these are the words that we would use to describe those characteristics. And you can see from that kind of just little mood board there, if you like, of the exemplars on our exemplar gallery. And it kind of fits with, is this an A-level work? Well, it looks more like a very low A-level work, or very a GCSE submission. And as we move through, things improve. So as we get to performance level 2, which is basic, there's an improvement in the fact that although things are deliberate and straightforward, they're still methodical, they're still superficial, they're a bit unrefined, a bit of a crude visual language. That seems a bit harsh, but if you look at the drawing based on the John Piper inspired drawing of the fountain, you can see what we mean. So they play safe, they're unresolved, the contextual references are explored, but they lack relevance, and their understanding, developing control of the form elements is there, but it is developing. As we go into performance level 3, emerging competent, you start to see things that are predictable, but they're broadening. So I'll get rid of the background grid as I see them. It makes progress, it's relevant, it's description rather than explanation, and it demonstrates intentions. They're appropriate, there's sufficient control, and there is an emerging individuality. And the one I pointed out was that particularly there's if you remember last year's online module, that we had the jam jar at the top, which was a beautiful painting in gouache of a jam jar, but that's all it was. It was basically, that was the intention of the student, was to paint a good jam jar, and there was nothing more to it than that. So it kind of got it, although it was quite well controlled in it was probably higher in the level, performance level for recording, but it kind of slipped down in ideas at AO1 and AO2. When we get to performance level 4, we're starting to see students where things are becoming diverse, they're effective, and this is probably where you're trying to get the majority of your students. It's effective, it's consistent, it's informed, it satisfies creative intent. And as you look at the images there, if you're familiar with the exemplar gallery, you'll see samples there that you recognise, and recognise that there's a lot of work gone into these, but this is and that's where it is. So as we move higher up into the kind of really the top of the qualification, which is performance level 5, you don't have to go any further than this to get all the grades, between 52 to 60 marks. We're starting now to see work that's realised, sensitive, creative, sustained. Nicer words, I admit, but then we're at the top of the qualification. So it's genuine creative journey, in-depth reflection, and again, if you're familiar with the exemplar gallery, you'll recognise some of these 8 memoirs that are here in front of you. Now, just a brief comment about level 6. We have examples for you in level 6. And it's quite nice that we do, but it's not necessary for every student who wants the top grades to get into level 6. If you go back to the, this is marked 64 to 72, and if I was just to kind of just quickly put that one back up there, you can see that 64 to 72 for paper 2. You can see it's well above our 55 that we need to get that top grade. So so 55 is the top for the practical element, then 64 is way above what you need to get to get the top grade. What's interesting about this though is, and I deliberately put this these pictures on here because it shows you 2 students. One is with the lips that are turned into a dress is a student called Yolanda, which is in our exemplar gallery, and she's quite a good example to highlight because she was exceptional in her practical element, so she got 64 out of 72, but with a personal study it was only 8 or 10 marks, and so because she did perform so well in this level, she still and didn't perform so well with the written element, she was still able to access that high grade. And that's one of the advantages of not putting all of the higher grades into the top level 6. So what we're looking for in a student who's working in this performance level, they need to be inspired, they need to surprise us, they're unique, they're authoritative, and also it's highly intuitive, daring, insightful. Ideas are synthesized into highly sophisticated realizations. Well, it's not often that we get that with a student, but when we do, you know where they are. Okay, so I'm seeing comments going into the chat box, which is great. So Elaine will be there and helping you with that. So as we come to the end of this little part of the presentation, before we start to look at the work, just want to point you in the direction of the exemplar gallery. Now, we've had this there for a long time. It used to be called the exemplar library. It's now the exemplar gallery, but it's been refined a little bit and it's been updated. It was always easy to get to before, but it's even better now because it's simpler. But if you just typed in exemplar gallery, Pearson art design, you'll come up with this page. And if I was able to click on performance level 1 or performance level 4, it'll open a page which has component 1, component 2, and lots of little pictures from some of the samples within that gallery. If you click on that, you'll see the whole body of work from that student, and along with their personal studies if it's component 1. And it's a really good way to access our exemplar materials. It's very effective and it's very straightforward. And that's one of the things that was commented quite favourably on from last year's moderation series. As we went round as moderators visiting your centres, the thing that the comments that came back, the majority of comments came back, was how pleased everyone was with the improvements to the exemplar gallery. We've put lots more work on there, and obviously it's a thing that grows and refines. I would suggest that you download all of those onto an iPad or a laptop and keep an archive yourself, simply because there's obviously only so much space on anything, and periodically what will happen is that we will kind of take some of the work away. Not that the standards change, we just take some of the way to refresh it and put new pieces on. At the end of any training session, you'll see that next year some of the work you see today may appear on the exemplar gallery, and some from the face-to-face training events will appear on the exemplar gallery. So it's constantly expanding. And if you've downloaded the work that's there already, or the work that's currently there, as things get updated, you'll start to build a more extensive archive. So that's quite a good way to do that. And that is your go-to place, along with the descriptors in the performance calculator. So what we have ultimately is the way that we mark the work is really by comparative judgment. You know, with the exemplars here that are populating the performance calculator are just placing those in the right place, and using the descriptors. Now, obviously, it's just an aide-memoire. What we do, if you've got a student who's developing ideas in AO1 and you think they're confident and assured, what I'm saying to you there is go and look at that sample that you've got a little picture of there. You know, a visual aid is sometimes better than a written aid. It's easier to see. So you just pop into the exemplar gallery and look at the whole body of work from that student. So this is just to kind of you know, just give you an idea. Again, if you've got a student that's working at, say, in AO3, and they're working recording ideas and observations, and you think they're confident and assured, you can go and look at the sample there. But it may well be that there isn't a sample on the mark that you've chosen for your fine art student in our level 5s. It's the same mark as the one you want to give. And there's no reason why you shouldn't look at another title. It just look at another mark. And there's no reason why you shouldn't look at a different component. So the component 1 and 2, although slightly different in nature, the component 1 is more extensive. It was started at the beginning of the course, so the start of it may look a bit more like a GCSE submission, but at the end of the component 1, it will look more like it should, and to the level that they've arrived at. And a component 2 is a shorter journey, but the standard of the component is the same across component 1 and 2. So if you can find an exemplar in component 2 that looks very similar to the work you've got in your component 1 candidate, then yes, look there too. It's not like you can only look in the right component. Look across the different titles. If you've got a textile student on a certain mark and we've only got a fine art student on that mark, have a look at that, because it may help. So really we're using the exemplar gallery and the performance calculator to identify the level and the mark of the students. I've got 3 more slides before we start looking at work, so just bear with me. So they're 3 very brief slides, and we've asked to put these in because we've had lots of questions about photography, which presents a unique problem for students who simply don't know how to best use the 15 hours as the culmination of their studies. So, you know, a fine art painter or sculptor can plan a piece of work very much like a textiles or graphics students can. But in photography, the students often accumulated the photo shoots needed to fulfill the broad-based theme, and there is a loss what to do next. So, but the art and design qualification was built around the idea of a sustained focus period to observe the students' unaided response. And the photography students equally have an opportunity to spend time showing what they've accomplished. So we've got 15 hours. It's a maximum of 5 sessions within 3 consecutive weeks. You could put that to them as 3 consecutive days of 5 hours, which could be quite a lot. It could be spread out. It could be 5 sessions of 3 hours. It can be spread over the 3 weeks once the first one started. You can tailor the sessions to meet the individual needs of the students. If you have extra sessions, then some can do one, some can do another. And it may well be for SEND students or people with physical needs that they have different access arrangements. We talk about some people who had found it difficult to work in a group of, you know, in silence for any length of time. It may be that you could put some screens up or something. It could easily be that for a photography student, you might make a corner of the exam room which is usually going to be the art department, isn't it, into a small studio space where they can still be invigilated, but they can still do use their camera and take photographs during the 15 hours. So there's lots of alternatives. It's not as it's not as kind of controlled as you maybe think. Obviously, it's done under the guidance of JCQ and exam regulations, no mobile phones, etc. But equally, if you can take cameras in, a photography student can take a camera in, so they can photograph their work at different stages and things through, as long as it's not on a phone, obviously, because you're not allowed to take them in. But the important thing to remember is that students mustn't access their preparatory studies outside once these sessions have started. So once they take the preparatory studies or supporting studies into the sustained focus period, into that exam conditions, they can have access to it for the 15 hours, but they can't take it away. So it has to be kind of kept there between sessions. They can't add anything extra that they've done outside of that 15 hours. So they can work on it during the 15 hours. They can add things to it. Why they'd want to do that, I don't know, because it should be all done beforehand. But equally, if someone is doing a painting and they want to kind of work something out in their sketchbook, that's fine, as long as it's done within the 15 hours. That doesn't prevent them going home if they've struggled with something within the composition. If they're doing some painting, they're struggling with painting a hand or painting something about the face or the color, it doesn't stop them going back and trying things out. They just can't bring it in and put it into the preparatory studies once this event has started. That's simply because JCQ it's a blanket rule so it makes it fair to all students across all different qualifications from all different exam boards. So it's not something we had any say in. It's just how it's done. I know it was done differently in the past, but that's the changes that were made some years ago. Once the supervised period is ended, students will not be able to add or alter their work. So that pertains to component 2. If they have done extra work outside that they can't use, or they feel a bit grieved that they can't put in, they can just put it into component 1, and it will be seen, and it won't be assessed the same, but it can be seen that way, and you can see the effort they've gone to. So it's not wasted, and it's not wasted anyway, because it allows them, if they're doing work at home between sessions, to try and refine things or resolve things. That's part of a working process. The next slide, I'm not going to run through this, it's a lot there. It's an awful lot to have on a slide on a PowerPoint. We just want to point out that there is a slide in the pack that you might want to read later. And also, just to let you know that we're going to be producing a short video which will look at how the photography students can use that period of sustained focus during the ESA. So that's something to look out for. And I think if Jacqueline, our subject advisor, will keep you updated on that. So just some final comments on the ESA. I'm not going to read the slide out. Important thing on this slide, I think, is that since the pandemic, we've had a number of, and it's probably only this year that it started to improve, because of the lack of opportunity students have had to do mock exams or sit exams. The current cohorts going through aren't as familiar with how to deal with that, and they've struggled with the ESA and the 15 hours. And the way to help them and support them really is to put in mock exams. One of the ways that you can do that, obviously, if they've done a GCSE in art design, they will have done a 10-hour time test, and that will help. But equally, if they haven't done that, that's good. It's a big jump to doing a 2-hour maths exam to do a 15-hour design exam, even though it is spread out over 3 days. And my advice would be that you put in year 12, you put in a mock exam for them, and hopefully in year 13 as well, at the beginning of year 13, just to get them used to working in those conditions. Equally, it's not necessary to write a final evaluation of the outcome, and if it is written, it must be done during the supervised period. And if I give them the choice of either making artwork or writing an evaluation, I know what I would rather they do. So consider the value it adds, and if anything, would it be better spent on their outcomes? Interim evaluation is probably is maybe more beneficial and something that they could be thinking about. So that's kind of really the first refresher bit of this presentation, really looking at the structure of the qualification and trying to just answer some of your questions. What we're going to do now is we're going to look through an A-level familiarization exercise, and it's a candidate or a student that we had last year in this training event. So it's it's a walkthrough level 6, Vicky component 2. It's in our exemplar gallery. We haven't got all the slides here, but it's really just enough to give you a flavour of what's there. And I would suggest at the end of this presentation, if you want to know more about this candidate, that you go to our exemplar gallery and have a look through the whole body of her work. So she was entered for photography, and we remind ourselves at A-level, for A-level component 2. So it's an ESA completed from February in the final year of a 2-year course. We've called her Vicky because she went to the Victorian Albert Museum. It's an anonymised name. And she explores the ESA theme of simple and complex. And as I said, it's to be found in the exemplar gallery online. So we're going to give you the marks. There's no big secret here. It's a familiarization. We just want you to remind you of the levels. So the mark that Vicky achieved was 15, 15, 16, 16. So she was working performance level 5 for AO1 and 2, and in performance level 6 for AO3 and 4. And she had a total mark of 62 out of 72. Now, what we've done with this candidate is we've just put in some of the slides. I'm just going to go through. So we're not going to look through the entire component. We're just going to get a feel of how Vicky's approached the practical assignment. But her final outcomes are shown at the end of this part of the PowerPoint. So this is the start of a project. It was simple and complex. Started with a trip to London, and they went to the V&A, where she took a great inspiration from. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with this one. She did lots and lots of photographs of things in the beautifully photographed things in the cases. So she took loads and loads of photographs. And as you say in here, wonderful things. Tim Walker's exhibition. And the start of an idea is coming where she's looking at kind of figures boxed up in covered up. She didn't really have any one idea. She had quite a lot of ideas. Looked at abstracting the body from, I think she saw this glass piece in the V&A, and then abstracting the body, the idea of abstracted. So she looked again taking photographs, using lighting, and of course that led her to Bill Brandt. But this is somebody, even at the beginning, even in a component 2, she's not kind of got an idea right at the beginning. She now looks at holograms, and it came to about looking at the body and about resurrecting the body or bringing the body back to life, and in terms of like holographic images, that kind of caught her imagination, I suppose, with the ABBA Voyage concert in London, which brings people back to the stage that 40 years after they stopped doing it. Like bringing Elvis back, and then it kind of makes it more personal. She does kind of these test hologram trial sets, practicing editing just to get the technique, and then she brings this idea of kind of more personal stuff, kind of photographs of a family, and making it so that it looks like there's you're kind of reanimating, bringing somebody back from the dead. She diverts a little bit in some places. I mean, I've only put in a few. So there are more slides in the original pack in the exemplar gallery. I've just put in a few key slides. She's quite diverse. She's looking at all sorts of different things. Looking at American photographers, responding to that, exploring the lighting. She goes into miniatures and gets quite intrigued by these miniatures, and then instantly goes back and takes some photographs. Applies that with the sculptures. I think it's when she starts to look at the sculptures that brings in another idea. So somebody really is exploring all sorts of different solutions at the beginning of a project. And then it gets to the idea of the price of beauty. So they all kind of blend together towards the end, and as you see. talks technically a lot about how she produced the images, but yes, it is that idea of beauty, the price of beauty, corsets and containing the body. And it's almost like feeling, it's not just fashion, it's almost about being tortured, isn't it, as well? Beautifully photographed. The student knows how to take a good photograph, but it's not just about the photographs, is it? It's about the ideas going on behind them and making those contextual references. Eventually, there's quite a lot of those. Eventually, she comes looking at the work that she saw in the V&A archives, where things are covered up with plastic in boxes, to preserve them, and the idea of things being shrink wrapped, shrink wrapping people, and like a chicken or a piece of meat, and then again looking at Christo and Jean-Claude, again the idea of wrapping things up, things in storage at the V&A, the sculptures being wrapped up with plastic. She experiments the idea of wrapping things with plastic, but then struggled with the reflections, came up with other solutions, like the idea of wrapping with fabric. And then staging an escape by the looks of it. Again, she's aware and relevant and understands all that's going on around her in terms of contextual references. She even goes to the point of looking at poses from statues in the V&A and builds her own set, looks at the lighting, and you can see here creating that set. And again, it's a little bit like bringing things back to life. There's still that element of the holographic images of bringing statues to life for a final editing, for a final piece. So that's the piece I wanted to show you as a familiarization of a mark. So we just look at, so achieves a mark of 62 for component 2. And we're going to look at how they're generated. Now we have a sense of what Vicky was trying to achieve and of the mark that was awarded and standardized by a senior team of examiners. We're going to look at how they're placed on the performance calculator. So she scores 15, developed ideas informed by contextual sources, demonstrated critical and analytical understanding. So she explores the ESA theme of simple and complex with a series of photographic shoots, taking a primary inspiration from a visit to the museum, the V&A Museum in London. Looking at a series of objects she's interested in the form of sculpture, and these show a level of confidence that is sensitive, creative, sustained, and follows a genuine creative journey. She settles on exploring the idea of bringing the dead back to life. In AO2, again, a mark of 15. In AO2, she experiments with composition, replicating the portrait bust in a photographic genre, and at the beginning of her primary concern is the exploration of simple and complex forms using the camera. So, and this develops through insightful and inventive control of the formal elements. She settles on the notion of holograms, pushing the boundaries of three-dimensional form into the future, inspired at the stage by 19th century women being refined and modest. Vicky is equally confident in exploring negative space and realizes her intentions over a broad investigation. Sorry, I went too fast there. So in AO3, she's starting to move higher into exceptional. So inspired by Christo and access to the V&A archive, leads Vicky to experiment with recording the human form in various stages of wrap and unwrap. The price of beauty is explored and the comparison between female body and artwork being hidden or part hidden or concealed. Okay. The student has clear control of the formal elements and uses their knowledge of composition and lighting to create sophisticated outcomes. And finally, in component 2 for AO4, again 16. These genuinely creative images show the extent of Vicky's experimentation with form and space and bring her firmly into level 6, where daring and insightful ideas are synthesized to provide erudite and highly intuitive compositions which show those sophisticated realizations. So that's the final image. And when that's kind of combined onto the performance calculator, we take all of those marks with us, and you can see how she's performed. And in a performance calculator in your center, you probably would put some of the words in those boxes. This is just really just illustrate, you know, where they are. And then, of course, that's all transcribed onto an assessment grid, which is then placed out on the work for the moderation or for your exam software to submit the marks. So now we get to the kind of main part of today. With the first hour of this session has really been going through all of that. And what I'm going to do is got 4 candidates to look at. So now's the kind of fun bit, really, where we start to look at the work. And what I'll do is I'm going to take you through the first one, which is candidate A, which is Roger. This is a graphic communication. It's a component 1. The theme was assignment. And we're going to have a look at that. And I'm going through it quickly first, just to get an overview, because it's really the only way we can do that in these events. Seem to have something. That's it. I have to make where I leave my mouse, otherwise it's on the screen here. So I'll just click through the support the work first. These are some of the final designs. And we've got some graphics for you today. We've got some photography, and we've got some art, craft and design. A little bit of a parallel. It's kind of like the price of beauty again, isn't it, really? So what I would suggest you have is, if you've got access to a performance calculator, would be ideal. And if you have a second screen, or you have an iPad or something with the exemplar gallery on, that should be quite useful. Even if you're not able to do that, at least if that message is coming across that's the way to do it, to actually look for a mark and then reference that in the exemplar gallery. I will go through this a second time a bit slower so that you can see. I just want to get an overview of the submission first. You can see the journey where it, which direction it goes in. For those teaching graphics, this will be fairly familiar stuff to you. And also, obviously, with graphics and photography, it's quite often less expensive, easier to see, easier to organize as a digital portfolio. And we wanted to kind of cover those as well. Again, with international schools, a lot of you are sending them in as digital submissions, and therefore they're on a PowerPoint or a PDF slide. So got to the personal study. I'm going to be very careful I don't reveal the mark. That's what I'm scared of the most. You have got all the personal studies. They're all here. There's something that, if you've managed to have a chance to look through before the event, I hadn't realised they'd been sent to you, which is great. That's really good, so you can actually think about the mark. But you know, at the end of the day, personal studies do take quite a little bit of time to look through and read through and fully understand. So we're going to go through that a little bit slower. I'm trying not to say too much because I don't want to kind of influence you anyway, but If you've got any comments you want to pop into the chat or the Q&A, then please do just populate that. Once we've revealed the mark, we'll go through it like we did with the familiarization piece, just to kind of see where the marks were and why. As you come to some kind of level, that would be good if you put a level in there, or perhaps even a mark, or a total mark, or even if not a breakdown of the mark. So I went a bit fast on that one, didn't I? Okay. It's quite nice to have a graphic one. Is that we struggle to find examples of graphics of a certain level. So on to the personal study, which is how has the development of science influenced illustration, which is quite. If you want to pop any marks into and share in the group chat, that's quite nice. You don't have to, but if you want to like to. If you've certainly got a record for yourself before I reveal the mark, it'd be quite good. So very shortly we're going to look at the mark. Just kind of one last page. As with all personal studies, they need to have acknowledge their sources. Okay. So I think if you're all ready, I'm just going to pop in the next one, which shows the mark breakdown and the final mark. And you might be pleasantly surprised. So it's confident and assured. It's a level 5. I think a lot of you have got that. You kind of high level 4, low level 5. 14, 13, 12, 13, and 11 for the personal study. So it's 52. Really, somebody said 50, I saw earlier, 50, 50, 52. So it's 52 plus the 11 for the personal study, making 63. So let's look at how they performed in each AO. So Roger has an early idea in the project and explores the theme of flaws and imperfections with a brainstorming of facts and research which drive the project brief for AO1. So there you are, 14 into level 5. In AO2, the candidate has chosen to limit his palette to give an overall balance in the design, and while less successful, still retains a level of performance that goes beyond a level 4 submission. So it's still a little bit lower in AO2, just not quite as good as AO1, but still within level 5. The solutions offered in AO3 fall slightly shorter than the earlier experiments, with initial ideas, and Roger has settled on a purposeful and consistent response to the idea first imagined though he does retain a competent and consistent control of the formal elements. So he's now kind of slipped a little bit here at the top of level 4. So some of you are saying level 4, some are saying level 5. Well, that's really where this candidate was working, isn't it? In both of those levels. The outcome deals with a simple message in the post of the Prince's Trust brief pays due homage to the Frida Kahlo poster by Shepard Fairey, referenced in the contextual references, which has inspired his compositional choice. So there's quite a little bit of a homage, or you can certainly see the source of that. But it again just brings it to the bottom of level 5. Although this goes beyond a simple pastiche, it's still heavily reliant on capturing elements from the source materials, and this puts Roger at the low entry level of confident and assured. But nevertheless, he's achieved a credible image in the final design, capturing a highly credible and emotive poster design. There you are. So once you then put of those marks together, you can see this candidate is working from the middle to the bottom of competent and assured, with an element of competent and consistent. But overall, it's a mark of 52 with 11 for the personal study. Well, I think you didn't do too badly on that one. By the look from one marks I can see in the level 4 to level 5. Yeah, you're a little bit, probably makes us more generous. So this next candidate B, Paul. It's another marking exercise. This is art, craft and design, component 2, so obviously no personal study. So I'm going to again do the same thing where I'll go through it reasonably quickly just to get an overall view. It's a shorter one. It's being component 2 is shorter, and also for other reasons it's shorter, which you'll see soon. But yeah, have a look at it. I think the giveaway is even on the first slide, but probably one of the most interesting pages, I think. And then there are outcomes in terms of lino prints. We see here, and then as we move on, there were some outcomes in clay. The candidate didn't fire them because I think they were worried that they might not survive the firing process being through the kiln. But so they were kept as dry clay. So I'll just go back to this, only a very short on this one, Paul, but I'll go back to the beginning again. There's a bit more time on each slide. I'll give you a chance to just decide on a mark. And look, yeah, if you look closely at even the first page, it gives you some idea. Norm Cabot, some contextual sources, constructivist, kind of a photo montage. It'd be interesting to see what you think of this one. I think Maria's hit it right on there. Okay, well done. That's good. Basic level 2. Just Tom's put in there. We'll reveal the marks shortly. Just have a look at these photographs again. Yes, it's predictable. That's good. There you are. Let's show you there's the mark, because I think you're all about there, weren't you? 6766. Now, obviously, when we come in to moderate, the only time we would be interested in the breakdown is if we don't agree on the total mark. But if you're agreeing on the total mark, or fairly close to the total mark, that's fine. You know, sometimes we do differ slightly in the breakdown. But that was a 6766. We'll just have a look at how they arrived at those. So all the elements being used in this submission make their appearance in the first few pages of the sketchbook. While this is art, craft and design, the candidate has some interesting ideas that seem to show quite simplistic and rudimentary ideas and rely heavily on collecting, gathering with reference materials, but they firmly remain in level 2, don't they? It shows all the typical attributes of a candidate who has worked with methodical intention, and while the idea goes beyond the expectation of an entry level, it remains deliberate and straightforward. So in AO, Paul has chosen to use a photo montage technique to begin an exploration of shape and form with relevant materials, techniques and process. The development of the idea is somewhat stifled by a lack of understanding, though it shows a developing knowledge of the formal elements, which allows him to consolidate these into simplistic lino prints. There's an emerging ability which drives the progression of ideas further. So there we are. An emerging ability is evidence with which tips this candidate forward into the lower band of level 3 for AO2. It remains somewhat predictable with broadening aims and demonstrates clear intentions. So it achieves 7 in AO2. Paul makes the transition of materials from monochrome print to clay sculpture, and this enables him to modify the design, adding form to shape and recording further observations. The progress is quite pedestrian, with minimal addition to their understanding of developing ideas. It plays safe and quite straightforward and predictable, with relatively crude visual language. So again, we've kind of dropped back into basic here. In this assessment objective, Paul has made observations and recorded insights relevant to intentions with a level of skill which is adequate, deliberate and methodical. Contextual references have explored, but this lacks sufficient relevance, and a lack of refinement has restricted progression, so the candidate remains firmly at the top of level 2 in basic. The clay tiles here depict a candidate who has simple and straightforward ambition that is indicative of a typical level 2 submission. And it's therefore grounded in the basic characteristics of the qualification that show unresolved and basic solutions that play safe. So there we are. He retains a consistent performance across the AOs, which never really goes beyond the superficial objective of creating a clay tile based on a collection of initial resources and various reference materials gathered at the start of the ESA. He goes through the motion of creating a clay tile, and the energy is focused on completing this 3D outcome, with minimal consideration of any further development or analysis, other than translating a 2D design into a 3D outcome. So he achieves a mark of 6 for this AO, for the final AO. And when you combine them together, you can see 6766 is fairly consistent across top of level 2, just kind of a little bit more experimental in AO2. But AO1, 3 and 4 are very much the same, and a total mark of 25. I think you all did really well on that one by the looks of it, from what I can see in the chat box. So we now go to candidate C, which is Lou. It'd be interesting to see what you do with this one, because we had this event yesterday in the afternoon, and quite pleasantly surprised by the response. So the candidate we're going to assess now was entered for fine art. It's a component 1. And obviously this component is usually completed over the 2-year course. It's very strange moving from component 1 to component 2 and then back to component 1 again, remembering that the quantity varies significantly, doesn't it? So we'll have a look at this, and the theme that she chose was natural forms. So I'll go through again quickly first. Not so quickly, but to give you an idea. So I'm just going through it just to get an overview, and then I'll go through it a second time. These are the final pieces, the outcomes. And then the person study as well. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the beginning for this student. So another run through, so you've got an idea of the whole body of the work. And now just have a look at perhaps look at the statement of intent, observational studies, working with paper structures, wax resist drawings. These are just kind of 3-minute drawings, quick sketches. Got a contextual reference there. It's interesting, I think, how Canada explores form and space through line and shape, which is someone like Norm Cabot or perhaps even Alexander Calder were doing. But again, obviously being a component one submission, there's several projects, several kind of chances to deviate a little bit from during the course of the program of study. So they've wisely chosen to explore sculpture, I think. It doesn't always necessarily that the recording skills have to be up there. But it's what they do with the investigation that with the level of investigation they're making. Sometimes the recording and drawing builds later, doesn't it? Some people start off at the beginning of the course with incredible drawing skills, and others kind of explore those and refine those during the course. Don't be put off by one page. We're looking at a body of work and it's marked holistically. So again, there's more ways of recording than drawing with line. It's quite an unusual one, this is, because some people think it's low, some people think it's high, and it's yesterday people were thinking it was high. It looks like some of you are thinking it's low today. The drawings are weak, but it's not our assessment criteria doesn't just involve drawing. And you could argue that moving paper, moving wire is equally a kind of drawing, isn't it? But in a three-dimensional form. But the person doesn't draw well two-dimensionally, but that's probably why she explored sculpture, I would imagine. And looking at negative space. And recording is about taking photographs as well. It's not just about using materials. Drawing with wire. Yes, but a kind of a pencil line drawings, they're not. But where she moves away from that and explores things in other materials. she. Yeah, I think it's Paul. No. So we're coming to the kind of final pieces. There were more of these actually. We photographed 4 of them, but there were more. And they're quite big. They're not small. These are probably 2 foot, quite big pieces. They're not. They doesn't send any sense of scale there really. Yes, I do. I like the fact that she's trying to do something different. It's personal, isn't it? And that's what this qualification is about. It's about a personal response. So, personal service, harmony and contradiction. How have artists represented the vision and conceptual balance and imbalance of natural form? So we're going to just refill the marks. I think if you wanted to put in your marks, I think one or two of you have. And there's quite a mixed bag, isn't it? Some people think it's quite good. Some people think it's a lot lower. Well, we'll go through it. So it was 10 across, really, 10 for each of assessment objectives. So it's level 4, just into competent and consistent. 10 for each AO and 10 for the personal study. So let's have a look at how Lou achieves that. So she achieves a level 4 across all assessment objectives in this AO. In this AO, the skillful, imaginative, and purposeful ideas show some perception, and it satisfies creative intent expressed in the opening pages of the sketchbook. Drawing and exploration of form underpin many studies which show determination to review and refine work as it progresses. Quick sketches and detailed studies inspire creativity, and some of these ideas are successfully realised, allowing a purposeful response which is competent and consistent. In AO2, same mark, Lou can select appropriate resources, media, and materials which show an understanding of meaningful contextual sources that support investigations. And while they're curtailed early, they explore in sufficient diversity to satisfy the creative intent. So she really has just edged herself out of level 3 into the bottom of level 4, hasn't she? And I think that's really across each of the AOs. Experiments with wire to describe the occupation of space with linear 3D shapes has allowed the candidate to draw intuitively to explore form using line. But she's doing this with wire. The focus is on method and shows a consistent control of the formal elements when she's using some other materials, I think. In this assessment objective, she gets 10 again. Lewis made observations and recorded insights relevant to intentions with a level of skill which is diverse, effective, and novel. Reflection on the work of others is competently achieved, and though descriptive, there's an underlying understanding of the need to control the formal elements to inspire creativity. Therefore, the candidate has achieved entry to the lower band of level 4 with 10 marks. Assessment objective 4 is about realising intentions, and Lou can demonstrate a competent and consistent journey which has been maintained throughout the sketchbook. Imaginative compositions are reliant on translating 2D surfaces into 3D form, and so Lou has even considered colours within the outcomes. So she's worked across all the assessment objectives with equal determination and engaged her studies in resolving skillful solutions to quite simple yet purposeful aims. This is certainly a personal and meaningful response which has inspired a level of creativity that is evidenced in the sources and shows genuine curiosity. And I think for me, this was obviously, I've seen this, this one is one of those candidates who doesn't translate very well to a PowerPoint or digital presentation. And I think that's often the case, isn't it? Graphics and photography do lend themselves well to a digital format, whereas textiles and sculpture probably don't. So that's quite a difficult one to do. But we want to put that out there and have a look. And one more slide there just to see outcomes and the way that works with the assessment grid. So she's just managed, this could easily have been a student that was in level 3, but she's managed to get herself into level 4. We've got the last one, we've got about half an hour left, got quite a nice one to show you, but it's a slight change in format though, because I'm going to just introduce this one, which is Philly. It's a marking exercise, it's photography, it's for component 1. The theme they followed was filtered, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in, if it works, a PDF here, so that we can, because it's easy to look through the PDF. This is the original PDF from the candidate. We thought we'd show it you this way. I know we're kind of scrolling a little bit, but if I can show you this way, it makes it more sense. And rather than go through twice, because I think you'll go with the scrolling, it does get a bit much. I'm going to go through it gently and just have a look at this. So I feel if I go through this as I did before, where I randomly go through very quickly, it will make you all go dizzy. It made me go dizzy. So I've decided to take it this way so you get a chance to look at each of the slides. There's quite a lot of slides. By pausing on each one. So obviously at the beginning of a component 1, you do get where they're exploring different techniques. With a digital submission, it's very, very easy to present the work well, isn't it? And it's very clear with the writing. So using a prism to distort nature. Contextual reference here. This is Gerhard Richter. Again, crediting the sources. There's quite a lot of slides to get through, so it's a long journey. I just wanted you to see a bit of time looking at those. Just looking at coloured gels. Experiment with tracing paper too, so kind of photographing through tracing paper. You'll see in a moment. You see the little thumbnails on the left. You'll see results of that. I've experimented with tracing paper, then they kind of move on to using Vaseline on the lens to blur the images. Good to see Ophelia making an appearance again. but, quite effective, aren't they, with the movement, the lines. There's a lot of photographs to look at, so I'm taking them slowly because I think that's probably a better way of doing it than conscious of the time that we have. We've got 20 minutes left, and hopefully that will give us enough time to look at the results at the end and have some comments and feedback. If you've got any feedback you want to put so far, we're kind of nearly halfway through. These are almost like charcoal drawings, aren't they? They're quite beautifully done. It reminds me of German expression like Kater Kollwitz and Frank Habermas. Creating blur with Vaseline. So I was just saying about comment of the editing of the slides. It's difficult. It's a very difficult way to present work on a PowerPoint like this, isn't it? Because obviously, if you could have control of the slides, you could go through at your own leisure. It is. I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. It's so that was that was obviously a component one. There's a lot of work in there. So we're now looking at another kind of element of that. Was the first part of a component one submission. This is a second part. Abstract photography focusing purely on color and shape. So it's a bit more colorful. You could argue that if you were to edit it down, what kind of difference would it have made to the final performance level? We're on slide 74 or something. It's over 100, so we're just going to go through the challenge. You get an idea of it, but you do get an idea of the practice, and you will have a copy of this PowerPoint at the end of the presentation. You'll have access to this. I'm not sure whether this is being sent to you or whether it's able to be accessed, but I know that it is available to you. A lot of these exemplars will also appear at some point later in the year on the exemplar gallery, but you'll have them in advance once the and this pre-recording, you'll be able to go back over this recording, and if you've been here today, you'll have access to a recording to go through it again, so which you can then probably go through it a little bit different. For me, it's trying to time it so that I can get you to see everything and then also look at the mark at the end. So I kind of think it's going quite well. All down to textured sculptures now, which is very, very much in kind of looking at German Expressionist art and German Expressionist filmmaking. And to some extent, I think that color theory too. So a final piece idea coming up for this project. We're getting there. We're getting there. So it's nice that you'll have seen everything. Just to see. Looking at deltas, river, estuaries, deltas. Taking a lot of inspiration from natural forms, aren't they? Which is quite nice to see, and they're very diverse. So I think if I go back to the original PowerPoint now, I think we can do that. Yeah. So obviously, so we'll look at the personal study on here. So we're back on the original PowerPoint. So that was the PDF file I wanted to show you. And if you've had a chance to read through this, you'll have come up to some conclusions about it. So I think really it's time to reveal the market. I think you've got, some of you think it's level 5 and one or two think it goes up to level 6. Let's show you the mark. So it's 14, 14, 14, 14. So right in the middle of confident and assured, level 5. Personal study isn't quite as high, is it? It's on, and that kind of doesn't help it a bit. Just show you how important the personal study is. So total mark of 67, still a very good student, still top student on the highest grade. Let's just see how they arrived at that. So Philly has comfortably achieved a midpoint in the performance calculator for this level, obviously midpoint in level 5, which demonstrates her independent, sensitive and highly inventive and genuine creative journey. She understands the wider context of the contextual sources investigated and uses this knowledge to explore genuinely personal ideas which are both exciting and comprehensive. She demonstrates analytical and critical understanding from the start of this component, which is essential to satisfy the complexity of the assessment objective. So she's firmly in level 5, confident and assured. Ideas are informed by contextual sources and reinforced by intelligent investigation and exploration of themes. Experiments are lengthy and in-depth, and Philly can demonstrate the appropriate use of materials with both lens-based media, and is willing to explore a variety of techniques to blur images and record these with detailed and purposeful annotation. So again, kind of right in the middle of level 5. She achieves a mark of 14 because she shows a personal insight with exciting and comprehensive control of the formal elements, which lifts her into level 5. She's a confident, assured, and is able to fully realise all her aims and objectives. Recording ideas and observations relevant to intentions has allowed Philly to create sensitive and purposeful images which are both sustained and refined. The simplicity of the theme filtered does not inhibit the ambition of the candidate to record both delicate and sensitive lighting effects with curiosity and personal insight into the techniques required to achieve this performance level. I think, yeah, somebody said there's a lot of repetition, and I think, Tom, you're right. And I think that's the nature of photography, because you can produce a lot of work, and so you've got nearly 2 years to do that. Philly has maintained a confident and comprehensive control of the formal elements to record with the photography and critically reflect on the work of others who have inspired a genuine creative journey. So to elevate any candidates into the higher mark bands, it's essential that consideration of the assessment objectives is fully understood and that attention is made to the equal weighting of AO1 to AO4. To present a personal and meaningful response, it is imperative that candidates understand the nature of the qualification. The specification is designed to celebrate and reward genuine investigation and authoritative and erudite responses with ideas synthesized into sophisticated realizations. This candidate has successfully demonstrated they are moving rapidly towards those characteristics. And the candidate is typical of a confident and assured performance level in response to the chosen themes that they've explored. Okay, so she's into that. And then obviously as that translates across, it's a 56. For component 1, it's a good mark, and we've got kind of 8 minutes left. So I just wanted, there's an opportunity, obviously, please keep asking the questions. Elaine is still there and replying to your questions, but we've got about 8 minutes, and just to kind of, yeah, if you've got anything you really want to say. now's the time to do it. While we're doing that, I just want to kind of point in the direction of the further support that's available. I'm sure all of you have realised that we have in the last year or so had a new subject advisor. Our subject, Susan Young, who was our previous subject advisor, had been for a long time, has retired, and we've now got Jacqueline, who's taken over that role, and it's our new dedicated subject advisor for art, design and media. And you can contact Jacqueline on the email addresses shown here, or on a phone. And there are times there which is best time to get it. But what I would suggest that you do is that you sign up to the subject advisor updates, and you could even book a Teams meeting with her. But if you've got lots of questions to ask, then that's the place to go. We've got lots of support for you, and there is our Professional Development Academy, and your feedback matters. So following this event, you will receive an invitation to share your thoughts about the session, and the feedback is invaluable to us as it helps us tailor our professional development materials to better meet your needs. Please don't hesitate to let us know what you'd like to see more of and what areas you think could be improved. So I'm just going to go back. So I just wanted to make sure we'd done all those, but we'll go back to the plenary questions. There's a good one. A written reflection. How much writing do you expect to see in component 1? It's a shame we didn't come to offer. We've got a very good candidate in exemplar in our face-to-face event at the moment, in component 1 and component 2, and it's quite interesting to see that they've achieved some very high marks, and with quite minimal annotation and written element. The written element in the personal study should be supporting the journey that the students have taken, and it should inform their practical outcomes. But there's no requirement for pages and pages and pages of written content unless it's relevant or unless it's something they actually want to do. It's really a visual language, and if it can be done in that way, far better to spend the time drawing and recording in that way. So we talk about recording, drawing and painting, making artwork is far more relevant than writing about it. It's an art design qualification. So it's very easy, I think, for students to get drawn into spending hours and hours writing about something when they actually could be doing it. And I think that's something that, if you look at a lot of our exemplars in the exemplar gallery, it doesn't mean, if you see lots of writing in there, it doesn't mean to say that that's what we've asked for. It's just that's an example of what that student's done, and that's the mark they got. So in all of the examples on the exemplar gallery, it really is just a genuine and honest gallery of students' work. And equally, you'll see that there are some students who do a minimal amount of annotation, some do a lot. There's no right or wrong way. Yeah, Tom, you want to see the breakdown on the thumbnail. I'm wondering why. I mean, the thing we would like you to do is to make sure that you're not just looking at them as an aide memoir. Really, we want you to look at the whole body of work, because it is marked holistically. It's not, as some of you were pointing out earlier, there's one or two samples we've looked at where there's one or two drawings that weren't particularly very good, but we don't mark people down because of a poor drawing in their work. We're looking at the body of work as a whole, and maybe other ways of recording they've found that are more successful. We're looking for ideas in the personal study. We're not, but what we're not looking at is grammar and spelling, because all that can be corrected, can't it? A written element. It's part of the component 1. It's part of the coursework submission. It could have endless rewrites, and it's also difficult as well because a lot of students who are entering this qualification from international schools, English may not be their first language, so they're writing in a second language or a third language, and we're not here with, it's not an English qualification where we're looking at the prose, we're looking at the punctuation, grammar, we're looking for the content, the creative, the analytical element within the, you know, the written submission. So to some extent, we're looking at the ideas and how those ideas inform their practical outcomes. We're not looking at students who want to talk about their own work. We're looking at how the investigations they've made in their written element informs and drives forward their practical outcomes in the same way that AO1, the development of ideas, does. So we're coming to the end of this. It's always interesting to do these things online. I'll probably just, what I'll do before we go, I'll just bring back up the. It's like driving a spaceship doing this, because when I want the toolbar to come back up, it doesn't come back up. But I'll just put my video back on and just. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today's session. We've got about a minute left, I think. If you've still got questions to ask, myself and Elaine will stay here for a few moments. But again, thank you very much for attending today, and hope it's been of some use to you, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. So, and it'd be probably two hours is enough of me from anyone, I think, for anyone. So thank you and goodbye. I think we're just about there, really, with the timing. We managed to get the timing right, which I think is good. So thank you. I'll just turn my video off again and hand back to our host so she can round up the event for us.